see everybody this morning. And the open forum, Dr. Joe Thompson, former Surgeon General for both Democrat and Republican. How rare is that? Democrat and Republican governors, and a great policy maker in his own right relative to the healthcare world. And Dr. Joe, thank you for being here.
Yeah, Tim, and before we kick off here, let me start by thanking you and Caitlin and the others that participated not only on the video that y'all did for me, but also on the support that I feel from y'all. It was much appreciated on my side. Last week, Tim delivered me some valuable liquid appreciation too that I greatly appreciate. But I just wanted to acknowledge that and really, this is part of the relationship development that is good in Arkansas to help make things happen, and I greatly appreciate being invited back. I know Sandra and Tim on my team, we put these things together, and then it's kind of helpful for us to synthesize it and to hear y'all's thoughts and reactions. So really, any question you have, any thought you have, please don't hesitate to throw it out on the table as we go forward today.
Yeah, let's do that. And that liquid, first time I bought cognac in a while. That's how special he is. So take it away, Dr. Joe.
All right, thank you. Sandra, why don't you get us pulled up if you can? And I'm afraid some of my news today is not going to be as uplifting as we would like for it to be. I had a couple of physician friends, Gary Wheeler, who's at the health department, Arlo Khan, who's my medical director. They came over yesterday afternoon. We sat in my front yard for an hour and a half or so. And I think all three of our, opinions came together that we are potentially at the precipice or over the precipice on kind of losing control of this thing, and a real need for leaders across the state to redouble the messaging efforts and so forth going forward. We're in September, October. This thing's going to be with us for a while. The thing that causes me the most concern is the escalation in the number of deaths that we're having here in the state. We've had over 100 deaths just in the last 5 days. We're going to have to update this because we're now clicking along at 20 to 25 deaths a day. And it wasn't that long ago where we were surprised when we were at 10 deaths a day. So this thing is marching through. We also see an uptick on, the three kind of hard numbers: deaths, hospitalizations. We're above 600 now, I think, over the weekend. These are the average daily number of patients hospitalized per week. But we were up over 600. We were at 608 hospitalizations yesterday. So this will bump up on the average as we go forward. We're seeing ventilator use continue to go up. And unfortunately, we're seeing, the disease, affect really all ages now. We've had over 140 hospitalizations in kids less than 18. Luckily, no deaths in the younger age group, but you see this is really affecting, the middle-aged individuals and the early seniors. And then obviously the deaths taking their toll on those that are upper in age or have more comorbidities. Those comorbidities, we keep tracking, any of these things, kidney problems, high dose steroids, cancer care that could compromise your immune system, diabetes. These things are, over 50% of Arkansans have a chronic condition of one type or another. And these chronic conditions are what, make our bodies less able to manage through the impact of the virus itself. Nationwide, the upper Midwest is really bearing a brunt now as the weather cools and people come back inside, and you have concentrations of folks, indoors now. The uncontrolled spread are those states that have a positivity rate on their testing of around 10%. Our PCR test is a little less than 10%. Our rapid antigen test is about 15%. So, we're in that high spread rate. We've had, 7.8 million cases, 215,000 deaths. I thought the next slide is interesting. These are the number of active cases, 7-day moving average for newly confirmed cases. The green line here at the top is India, which had an explosion last month, and now they have regained some control. The orange line there just below India that is trending upward is the United States, and then the peach colored line is Brazil, with all the other developed nations down there in the bottom. India has 1.3 billion people, and we have 300 million people. So they have 4 times as many people as we have, and yet we're having about the same number of infections each day, or on an average over the last 7 days, as India. Another kind of interesting thing is when surveyed around the globe about what are the percentage of people who say they always wear a mask. Now, you may remember 2 or 3 weeks ago, there was a survey that asked, did you wear a mask? And in Arkansas, it was about 90% of people said they had a mask and they wore it. But they didn't ask the question, do you always wear it? So this was the question, do you always wear it? And you can see there that the United States is a little less dark. They asked this question back in April of individuals across the United States, and we were at about 30 to 40% of our residents who said they always wear a mask. You'll see on the next slide, as the United States, we've gotten darker. More people are always wearing a mask, but in Arkansas, we didn't change. It's still 30 to 40% are always wearing a mask, at least by this survey. I think more people are wearing a mask, but that caveat of are you always wearing a mask when you're out is the difference on this survey question that I found somewhat interesting. We do keep marching forward. We've got now 93,000 cumulative positive cases. The confirmed cases are those that have the molecular tests. The probable cases are those that have the antigen tests. So you start seeing that rapid point of sight antigen test is becoming more frequent, more common. We had, like I said yesterday, 608 folks in the hospital, over 100 on ventilators. We've had over 1,500, almost 1,600 deaths, again, confirmed or with PCRs, probable or the people who had a positive antigen. Our healthcare system's starting to feel this burden a little bit. We had hotspots where we had one region or another that was up, in the 2, 3, 4 range, but most of the other regions were down in the 1 case per 1,000. Now we're starting to consistently see almost all of our trauma system regions having somewhere between 2 and 3 cases per 1,000. These are the rolling averages here. You see, again, the slight upward trend for all of our regions across the state. This thing, I've been watching it on our zip code map over the last week or over the last month. And this thing moves around. I mean, I think there are events, there are either, faith-based events, there are community gatherings, there are, family reunions where this thing just pops up with 100 or more, cases popping into a zip code. Here are the top 10 zip codes, if you will. So, we're putting this out on our call with the municipal league. Some discussions is could this be a strategy to look at if we have to go back to where we're having folks be in a more restricted situation? Could you do it by zip code? Could you say if you live in 72410, you need to shelter in place, your businesses need to to shutter for a few days, so that you could try to break the spread of this virus, because that's what we're seeing happen going forward. So a little bit of regional work there. The new cases continue to march forward. We had the 2 highest case rates here in the last little bit, at least community-based case rates. And I think that's a cause for concern. We've gone back to school, and I've actually been pleasantly surprised, of the 1,300 schools, the 300 school districts, there have been a few dozen that had to modify their teaching patterns, but for the most part, we've safely reopened. We do track known infections by the individuals in the school district over time. And this also, so every week we put out, from green to red, and it truly does kind of show. You see there at the bottom, Fayetteville, when the college came back and the students were on campus there the first couple of weeks of September, Fayetteville School District went red, and now as they've gotten a little more control, they're trending out of that. England obviously is going in the other direction. So again, this is something that we're trying to provide information for local leaders. The health department is actually publishing, and we're replicating active cases in those school districts. So these are, active infections, either in staff or students, and across the state. So this is becoming more prevalent across the state within our schools. We've gone back to football, both high school football and college football, tracking that across the nation. We are seeing increased number of cases at colleges and universities. Can't quite make it out here, but University of Arkansas has had over 2,000 cases according to here. The health department is publishing the number of active cases. Harding takes the if you want to, the prize this week for having the largest number of active cases. Again, these are students and staff. So again, I think the thing is out there. This is not new. Isolation. Actually, since we've been together, it's been a while. I have tried a new way of describing this, and let me do it, and y'all tell me whether it works. Basically, the timeline for COVID is 14 days. And what they're doing is, if you have a positive test, they're giving you credit for the first 4 days, and then they're saying you got to stay in isolation for the next 10. If you get exposed, you got to count those first 4 days plus the isolation days, which is why quarantine is 14. Either way, it's about 14. And this is, again, our best strategy is to understand who is infected and then try to mitigate the spread of that. We do have a new treatment option that's on the table now, or at least coming on. We've had the convalescent plasma. We've talked about that before, the antiviral drug remdesivir, the steroid dexamethasone. There now is a commercially generated antibody cocktail. This is one that President Trump got on compassionate care. It has not been approved by the Food and Drug Administration for emergency use, and it is in a randomized controlled trial. But we still are not seeing the knockout drug that I would hope that we could find at some point. And when I say knockout drug, I thought it would be somewhat informative to extract some of the graphics from the randomized controlled trials and talk about why we do those. So this is the remdesivir study. And across the bottom is the number of days since treatment. Now, you may remember in this study, these were really, really sick people. They were, in the intensive care unit, many of them on a ventilator, all of them needing oxygen. And so the proportion recovered, recovery is a good thing. So if you don't recover, you die or you stay sick. So, it's 25% here on the remdesivir line. The blue line did not recover, and about 30%, 35% of the placebo did. But you can see, even with remdesivir, we still have 25% of folks that don't recover. So it's not a knockout drug. It's better than placebo by about 5 or 10%, but it's not a knockout drug. The next study on dexamethasone, similarly, on this one, they actually measured death, mortality on the left, and the days since they started the treatment. And again, we're only getting about a 5% mortality reduction here if you get dexamethasone. So dexamethasone is not a knockout drug. And you'll see, these two lines, they randomize up front. They have patients, they blind the researchers and the clinicians to who's getting what, whether it's the drug or whether it's a placebo, and then they follow them over time in a blind way to see what the effect was, so that, because of the financial and other, potential pressures on the drug manufacturers, they want people not to know who got the drug and who didn't. But this is how a randomized controlled trial works. Finally, on the hydrochloroquine study, here's why the scientists came out against hydrochloroquine. You had about a 3 to 4% higher likelihood of dying by day 28 in a randomized controlled trial, and it offered no benefit. And so these are 3 studies that were randomized controlled trials, blinded to the clinicians and to the people given the drug. And this is kind of how these randomized controlled trials work. On our vaccine tracker, we not a whole lot has changed here, except some of the experience with the vaccines that we'll touch on in a second. And we have more in the pipeline. Phase 1, the safety trial; Phase 2, the effectiveness trial; and then Phase 3, the large, population-based trials. You can sign up in Arkansas to get, to participate in a trial. I know several people who have. I think I know who got the vaccine and who got the placebo, because the people with the vaccine get, some arm stiffness and sometimes some fever. And even in the second vaccine, one of the individuals felt, bad for a day. So, I think, they are eliciting an immune response. But we've also had, some challenges here. Even just in the last 24 hours, Johnson & Johnson became the second vaccine manufacturer in the United States to halt their vaccine trials. They had put a pause on the trial due to an unexpected severe illness. They stopped the enrollment. They're going to convene their data and safety monitoring board. This is our largest trial. You may remember earlier last month, AstraZeneca halted its trial for a similar major illness in one of its participants. Now, thinking about the randomized design, they don't know who got the vaccine and who didn't get the vaccine. So when something bad happens in a trial, they'll hit this pause button. They convene the safety board to see, was it likely that the adverse outcome, the bad event, was associated with the vaccine itself. AstraZeneca has resumed its trial in other countries. It has not yet resumed here in the United States. So, two of our four vaccine studies, have hit what is not an uncommon, event in their circumstances. If you're given a vaccine to 30,000 to 60,000 people, those folks, some of them are going to have something bad happen, and you have to stop and check to say, was it bad because it was always going to happen, or was there a possibility that it was associated with the vaccine itself? And because it's a blinded, randomized trial, that's what takes a little time to convene these boards and safety assessments before they proceed forward. But this is why I think we've always had concerns about the timeline that was promised for the vaccine and the reality of what is experienced in previous vaccine studies. Now, there's been a fair bit of discussion around herd immunity, so I thought we'd touch on that for a second. Herd immunity happens when a large enough portion of our community becomes immune, and that can happen either through vaccination or through active infection and response. Most scientists, the CDC, others, the effective threshold to get herd immunity, and that's whether it's through infection or vaccine, really has to be, somewhere between 80 and 90%. So that means 80 to 90% of the population have to have immunity by being exposed one way or another to the infectious agent to have herd immunity occur. Now, it's been thrown around the last week or so about herd immunity being a potential control strategy. And I think I come down with the World Health Organization chief, I can say his first name, I'm not going to try to say his last name, Tedros, where he said, both scientifically and ethically, thinking about herd immunity as a control strategy, that we would rely on herd immunity is problematic. Now, go into this a little bit deeper on why it's problematic, and I'm going to revisit his reason for saying that is we don't understand all of the aspects and damage that this virus can cause scientifically. And ethically, it clearly is affecting those in the lower income communities and those in communities of color disproportionately. So to just let the forest fire burn to try to save the forest is not either scientifically a wise thing to do or ethically, a responsible thing to do going forward. And the reason for the scientific side, and we've touched on this before, but just to revisit, as we learn more, we're going to know more about the damage that this virus can cause. And one that's coming out is really the longer term negative impact on your heart. These are 3 separate studies, each of which show a high proportion of individuals with COVID-19. The top bullet here were people, 2/3 of which never went in the hospital. They had relatively mild early on infectious symptoms but then within 2 months had structural damage to their heart and also inflammation, ongoing inflammation of their heart. We talked about the autopsy cases where 40% had evidence of the virus having infected your heart. And then the student athlete study where 15% of the student athletes had signs of inflammation of their heart, and another 30% with evidence of strain there. So, scientifically, I don't think you want to roll the dice and just say, well, let's let everybody have this, or we could end up with a lot of, folks with long-term heart problems that we will end up having to pay for in a different way. Another, data point that we went back, because, the argument goes, well, the flu kills more people than COVID. Well, that's factually not true. These are actually Arkansas numbers. The deaths attributed to COVID-19 to date this year at 1,586, and the number of deaths from influenza in the last 2 seasons at around 120, 122. So, this is significantly more risky. And again, it's more risky because our bodies have never seen it. We don't recognize it to fight it off. So, I think I picked the next slide up. This is not necessarily, these aren't scientific definitions, but I think there are 4 kind of immunity scenarios we can kind of think about. One would be, if for some reason we got the vaccine through the pipeline, and if it was a once and done kind of deal, best case scenario, you get vaccinated or you have the infection and you never get it again. That is very unlikely. It's not what happens with respiratory viruses. The next one would be functional immunity, where you get infected or you get the vaccine. You could get infected again, but because you have some immunity, it would be a shortened event, might not even have symptoms. You might be infected, but because you have some immunity, your body is able to handle it. Waning immunity would like functioning immunity, but that you would lose that protection over time. This would be where if a vaccine required a booster shot every so often to rev your immune system back up. And then obviously the question on these vaccines and on the issues around the infection is, do we lose immunity completely? Does our immune system not hold on to any memory about this virus and that it has the potential to come back? I think the most likely scenario are the middle 2. Functional immunity, where we get some immunity and we maintain it so that if we get infected again, it's not as serious a threat. Or waning immunity, where we have some immunity for a while, we may lose that and have to be, reintroduced or exposed through a vaccine or some other scenario. Now, we've got holidays coming up: Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas. Let's spend a moment here. The CDC has come out with guidance. They are recommending, avoidance of high-risk activities. I realize that for parents, this is not going to come across positive, but your traditional trick-or-treating up and down all the highways and byways of your community is strongly recommended against. Indoor costume parties, hay rides where you're piling on with folks that you don't know, the rural fall festivals that are not in your community, to go somewhere else. So again, this is that zone defense strategy that we've talked about. Protect yourself, don't expose yourself unnecessarily. The lower risk activities, pumpkin carving, decorating, scavenger hunt, scary movie night with, folks that you've been around. These are things that, we can still celebrate. We just have to be smart about it here in 2020. And then as we move towards Thanksgiving, I wanted to share this. This is actually another case study that the Center for Disease Control has put out. There was a family reunion. There were 20 folks who came together, including one teenager who had been exposed before the trip. Of the 14 folks who shared a house with the teenager, 11 of them plus the teen, so 12 out of 14 developed COVID-19. Of the 6 folks who visited but didn't stay in the house, they wore a mask, they visited outside. None of the 6 got infected. So this really, when we start thinking about family holidays and things like that, we need to keep in mind that those are potentially spreading events as you bring your loved ones together. And this is, again, evidence that, our basic strategy of distance, masking, hygiene, those are still our best tools here going forward. The last would put this back up. We've got the governor's press conference today. I think, they're going to be faced with the rapidly growing numbers, crossing the 600 threshold in terms of hospitalizations. We've got a larger number of folks than ever on the ventilators, and we're having, the death rate consistently increasing. So, I think our three most hard indicators suggest that we are not in control of the spread. And I would just appeal to each of you to keep yourself, your family, your coworkers safe. If you can, do your part to emphasize that, this is a continued and potentially growing risk. We don't want to go back to where we were in April or May, but we also, I think, have to recognize that the impact that COVID's having, not only in our state but across the country, really is avoidable. But we're on the precipice of losing control and going forward. So, Tim, I didn't let any questions in. I hope we generated some. I tried to cover the waterfront on not only where we were in the state, but where some of the developments were on drugs and vaccines, what some of the new information out of the CDC was.
Yeah.
So anyway, let me shut up.
Well, that was, as always, great presentation. You always have good information that we haven't seen before. We appreciate it. If I could ask you on the hospitalizations, I remember we looked at some data that showed the number of beds, and obviously an increase of any of those is terrible for health purposes, but for statistical purposes, how much room do we have? When's it get complicated?
Tim, I think we're getting close. I'll give you two answers that seem different, but I'll bring them together. I think before there was capacity in the different trauma regions. When one region flared up, you could move people to another region that wasn't in a higher caseload experience.
Yeah.
I think that's the capacity that we've lost some of that flexibility, and that is a cause for concern. Anecdotally, I know that there were individuals that there were requests to transfer them to Central Arkansas this weekend, and that no hospital in Central Arkansas was taking transferred patients because they were all full. And so patients ended up, I think, being shipped to Fort Smith. So yeah, I think we are, and it's not the beds. I mean, we talk about the number of ICU beds. It's the staff that go with those ICU beds. It's the physicians, the respiratory therapists, the nurses. I mean, you put somebody on a ventilator, it's 24 hours a day, 7 days a week until they come off. And you got to have all that staff 24 hours, 7 days a week. And that's where we're going to feel the pinch, particularly if our healthcare workers are also more exposed and having to quarantine, or hopefully not, but potentially becoming infected themselves. Mm-hmm. It's the staffing side of this that I have the most concerns about. Hospitals can open a room and put a sheet on a bed, and I think we've got the hardware in terms of ventilators, but I'm not sure that we have the staffing capacity. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, across the United States, everybody is having an explosion. So what New York benefited from early on was a redeployment of staff to New York and other, Northeastern communities, because we weren't needing it here. That capacity is going to be gone now also for a redeployment issue. So yeah, I don't want to be Chicken Little, but I also don't want to be caught short.
Well, and that also speaks to we ought to all be thoughtful about those workers and what we could do to help them, they do have a few tough months ahead, don't they?
Yep.
The healthcare workers. Yeah, I guess that's especially if that is a factor. Other questions?
Dr. Thompson, recent weeks, there's been a fair amount of discussion about aerosol disbursement and the contamination associated with that. In light of that, well, one, I'd like to hear your thoughts on that. And two, if that's really proven to be the case, is there a certain type of mask that you recommend that we use if there's aerosol disbursement?
So there was a flurry, and this was a couple of weeks ago, maybe 10 days. The CDC modified its guidance to actually add aerosol transmission as a possibility. we read through that guidance, and it still strongly emphasizes that the respiratory droplets are the primary cause, as we've been talking the whole long. To me, it almost read like a little bit of a CYA. Well, we don't have it out there that aerosol is possible, so we better add it. And then that caused a whole flurry of activity. Oh, you're changing the storyline on us. I think any relatively close-fitting mask is going to work. I mean, the bandanas don't work. The gaiters, we know, as we've talked about before, fractionate the droplets and make them be smaller. I think any good fitting mask is going to help protect you as well as others around you. I don't know that there's a necessary reason for folks to need to move to surgical masks. And I think the N95 masks are overkill probably, unless you are really in a frontline high exposure situation. So for example, I could see giving our poll workers a medical grade mask, on election day, because they're going to see total strangers all day long coming through the voter line. I think that a good fitting mask and a sound zone defense where you're trying to minimize your exposure to people that you don't usually come in contact with is the best strategy. Because your zone defense, if all of your zone is wearing a mask, y'all are protecting each other. That's where having the conversation to say, okay, that's what was so somewhat ironic this morning with our budget committee. For those of you that weren't on, the budget committee started its hearings today for the upcoming session, and the first order of business was whether they were going to require each other to wear a mask or not while they were in the budget committee.
Yeah, friction points of COVID. Thanks, Keith, for the question. Is that good enough for you?
Yes, thank you. That was very helpful.
Okay, you get some Adafio logo mask now. You know how far up you need to go.
Well, I tend to be one who errs on the overkill side. I kind of like the KN95 mask. We've ordered a lot of those for our company, and this virus scares me, and so we're going to probably overkill for a while. Yeah.
So you're a source for that if we're looking for one, huh? Just the people on the call anyway. Yeah, possibly. All right. Other questions?
Where's Miss Sarah? Did she have her baby?
Miss Sarah had her baby. Sure did.
Great.
Yeah, she had her baby. Something Joseph. I can't remember the first name. Can you remember? Healthy Scott Bailey got to do it. She was excited, or he was excited that he got to do it, because you never know when Malcolm, isn't that a nice name? Malcolm. Sounds like a Boo must have had a little influence on that one. But, and then Joseph was.
Let me spin the bottle and ask, those of you who are willing to share. I mean, if you could tell the governor to do something, what would it be?
Great question. You start. You get start.
That's not fun. I would say, Dr. Thompson, a couple of things. One, balancing trying to go back to work and save our company and not working till September 13th. And then, you have a 280 person triathlon, you follow all the Arkansas Health Department guidelines and national things. And then you feel like, okay, are we contributing to the problem, right? And then knowing that we did everything we could, like a lot of industries that have been functioning all year, and we're outdoors, non-stadium. And by the way, anyone that's on the call, we do event production. So running, biking, triathlon events, and we've had several that we've had to cancel and or severely, curtail. So that's kind of a tough one to, and you're on the call with business people that are trying to function. Then the one positive I did see is that the universities and the secondary schools seem to be functioning pretty well, because I would have thought those cases would have been just blown up compared to what the other cases you're talking about. So I don't know, a little bit of a statement. I didn't say anything to the governor, but I don't know, just my feedback there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. Bo Biddle? what would you all say? Not Fayetteville Chamber, but Biddle Insurance, Biddle Armstrong Insurance.
You know, the way that I've looked at it, I don't know that it's right or wrong, but you know, the people that, of those 1,500 people that have died, or whatever the 1,200, whatever that number was, I mean, it's pretty clear that the majority of those folks are made up of, at least based on everything that I've still read to date, people that had had other issues and or were older, had immune systems that couldn't fight it at the same level. So, you know, I've got little kids. I've got 2 6-year-olds that I'm trying to make sure learn to read, and so there's some of the decisions we've had to make to take on some risk. But what I've tried to be most conscious of in making those decisions is to protect my parents who are in their 70s and everyone like them, and that is at a greater risk of having more permanent consequences from this disease. And so, you know, at some level, it's like, is it really the governor's job to figure that out, or can we not, as people, try to protect those that are at the greatest risk of having effects from this? Again, I'm not saying that's the right way to look at it, but that's the way that we've tried to operate, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
But I think everybody who can do that needs to do. I mean, you're doing the right thing. So I want to encourage and commend. I'm trying to keep my 83-year-old mother out of stores. I mean, other than taking the keys away from her, which I may have to do at some point.
That COVID or not.
No, she's technically pretty savvy. I mean, and she's doing okay, and she's adhering for the most part, but she's getting a little stir crazy.
Yeah, I'll bet. Well, and Dr. Joe, you showed a slide sometime back, as I recall, when you were emphasizing the mask, where it showed if you had the mask on versus not, and how much it helped you. It was a really great slide. I wish everybody could get that slide. I can't remember what all it said, but to me, it made it so much more understandable.
It was kind of a cartoon. It had, I think, 3 people, one person who was infected and 2 others, one wearing a mask and one not. And the infected person was just spreading it. And then they put a mask on. There's still a little spread, but again, the exposure piece here, we can drop a lot if everybody's wearing a mask. Yeah.
I'd encourage him to use him to help continue to try to educate it. He's doing that, I think, but as much as he can. But on that particular slide, those 3 slides, I wish he could share Arkansas to have.
Tim, question or
input? Yes, sir.
I think your group's probably plugged into this, but the CARES Act effort that is going on up there in Northwest Arkansas, in that weekly report, or I don't know, is it weekly or daily? I think it's weekly that Montaigne puts out. They have the number of hospital beds occupied by COVID-19, number of ICU beds occupied. I would encourage y'all to pay attention to that, because I think we're gonna stress the system here pretty soon. I think the system is stressed now. I think we may have some problems in the system pretty soon.
Yeah, well, you could tell by how serious they were taking it, early on, that they obviously saw the risk of this occurring soon. They were a little up. Yeah, it should be. Jeff? Who's that?
Hey, Dr. Joe, this is Stuart. I guess the thing that you probably touched on it, but I'm slow enough, I probably need it repeated to me. The thing that really strikes me as odd is the other civilized Northern Europe countries that are doing so much better, and they're open economies, they're capitalist economies. What are they doing so much different to control this than us?
You know, without getting too far out on the political ice, but I'll go there. You know, I think they did not have the political strife. And so when their population heard from their leaders that this is a risk and here's what you need to do, they did it better. Now, Sweden is an exception. Sweden, Sweden is kind of doing a little more laissez-faire approach. Now, early on, they had a much higher death rate, almost equal to ours. So Sweden took a hit early on, but the other European countries, Spain is an exception, but the other, capitalistic European kind of developed countries, they've got more compliance and acceptance that this is a true risk by their population, and their consistent leadership message has helped reinforce that. I think we have lacked those two things.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I guess you could take on the philosophy that that we're doing a lot to save a few, but if it's your parent, they go a little early, it's going to hurt,
Well, I think that's where, the numbers and the numbers and the reality meet there when it's your parent. There are 1,500 families now that, and also I would just say, I think, because of what we have to do in nursing homes and hospitals to restrict visitation, folks that are in severe illness here, it is not a pleasant family experience going through this either, because you're not able to go see your loved one, even as they end up, deteriorating with this condition.
Mm-hmm. Yes. Mm-hmm.
Dr. Joe, to your question, what would the governor say? First, I'd say I think the governor's done an exceptional job communicating the message. I used to follow his daily briefings, and I just thought they were really well done.
Yeah.
One of the things that really impacted me early on was hearing directly from some of the frontline workers early on there in New York, and just how devastating it was and how hard it was for them, which is part of the point that you're saying, where our healthcare professionals are getting stressed to the max. I think that message would come better from you or one of those people that's been on the front line to communicate that this is really a big deal. I still have friends, it just flays me that they say, oh, that COVID death count is overstated. The hospitals are just checking that box so they can get the $30,000. And my response is, I think it's understated, but I think there's just some people, maybe hearing from, a doctor or someone on the front line might be able to tell the story of how the system is at a breaking point or stressed to the max.
It's a great comment, actually, just to resonate with. My team and I were talking yesterday, and one of our biggest challenges is to keep people from just becoming complacent, expecting there to be 30 deaths a day, from this thing. We clearly are having more deaths than we had this time a year ago, and so the new thing in the environment is COVID-19, and we're able to assign it to some. But thinking about what those frontline stories are, capturing some of those, either from the healthcare workers, as you suggest, or families that are willing to tell their story of what happened. We've had a superintendent at Atkins, and we've had a teacher in Northeast Arkansas die from this. To my knowledge, they didn't have any of those debilitating conditions. I mean, they were relatively, younger in terms of their situation. So capturing the stories, I think, would be a good idea. I'm not sure I'm the voice, but I think our team might be able to capture those voices and put it out there.
Good. Okay.
Dr. Thompson, I was wondering if you could on the annual seasonal flu vaccines this year. I know, for instance, my husband and even him here at Elevate is kind of the camp that they have never gotten flu vaccines and they haven't ever gotten flu. This year, is it more important to get those vaccines? Is that something that you guys would stress or no?
So Caitlin, you're a little soft, but I think you were asking about the flu vaccine and its importance for this year. Yeah, I strongly recommend that each of y'all get the flu vaccine and that you encourage others to do also. I got mine last week. It's not 100%, but I'll take anything that keeps me out of an ER or a doctor's office this year. If it's 70%, 60%, 50% less chance of me getting sick and worrying that I've got the COVID or that maybe even having both at the same time. I mean, I think we're sailing into a fall and winter with a lot of uncertainty. I mean, we've never had COVID and the flu together at the same time. On the positive side, it may be that we have a really light flu season because everybody's wearing a mask. On the negative side, if you get both at the same time, you're going to stress your body's ability to cope with it. And I think you need to take the flu shot to help protect yourself from that.
Yeah. Tommy Van Sant, I think Tommy's on. I saw earlier. You got anything you want to share? Ask the advice to the governor?
Oh, I'm kind of like Bo. It's frustrating to think that we have to have our governmental authorities to tell us what to do about wearing a mask and distancing. We all, golly, it just seems like, we all ought to have enough common sense to do these things on our own. I just think that, the governor needs to, spread it downhill to the mayors and other civic leaders to press upon people as much as possible to wear masks and distance. This is not, this isn't just going to go away, and it's getting worse, and it's real deal. And as Dr. Joe said, we've got more and more people dying every day. It's getting, it's just getting worse. So that would be my only thing.
Good wisdom. Good wisdom.
And Tommy, like we've always, this is not rocket science. This is common sense. It's just, it seems like maybe we need an extra dose.
Yeah.
Well, as our former football coach, Danny Ford, so famously said, this isn't rocket surgery. Use that one quite a bit over the years.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's right. It didn't. Well, leaders have to repeat themselves. So I think getting that 2 or 3 slides out and repeating that often is okay. I think the governor ought to do, and he does that. But sometimes we don't realize how much we have to repeat ourselves as leaders to get the message across, right? So if we want to send this.
Tim, the other thing, and I would encourage each of you to think about how your voice could be helpful. Those local leaders, your mayors, your city council persons, your superintendents, they're being asked to do something that, a lot of their constituency doesn't really want to have happen. So, reinforcement and support from you guys and gals to those local leaders is also important, to let them know that they're not alone out there on the frontier, that others recognize the need for the safety in your communities to keep things open and moving forward, that we all need to move together. It's back to that zone defense thing. We just got to be, helping each other get through this.
Yeah. Be smart, get in the arena somehow, in a smart way, right? To the extent you can.
There's another thing that could be emphasized that might, convince some of those people who are resistant to taking measures, is that there's a business case for this, right? There's a significant portion of the population that will not participate in the economy until they're convinced that everyone's taking it seriously and they see the infection rate go down. And that hurts businesses everywhere, right? So, whether you believe that it's a valid threat or not, the economy is going to suffer until, everyone is convinced that, it's safe to go out and participate.
Mhm. We're all leaning in and put it right. Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, thank you all.
Tim,
Anything
thank
else?
you for having me back. Thank you for letting me have a 2-week vacation. I would encourage each of y'all, if you haven't had a vacation, take a day off on these beautiful fall days and, roll the windows down and drive through the Ozarks.